Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you're tuning in wherever you are around the U.S. or in one of the 17 countries that have downloaded us now, either on YouTube, Google Play, or iTunes. This guy is one of the great gentlemen in the sport, a terrific trainer, Kentucky Derby winner, win multiple Breeders' Cups as well. Graham Motion joins us now. Graham, thanks for being on.
Hi, Kenny. Thanks for having me.
Let me just ask right now, let's catch up with the world of Graham Motion as we're not that far away from the Breeders' Cup. You've got a 2-year-old filly running this weekend that had a victory at Saratoga. Everybody gets excited about a 2-year-old. I'm sure you are about her.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. At this time of year, you're sort of looking for horses that can participate in the Breeders' Cup at the end of the year. And Sharing won pretty nicely at Saratoga. She actually won on the dirt, whereas we think she could be more of a grass filly. She's out of shared account. The mare that won the Breeders' Cup for me, I believe she was 40-1 the night she won the Breeders' Cup. Yeah. So obviously it's a pretty special family for me.
And her name again, I'm going to write this down, make sure we all get it.
Sharing,
yeah. I like those simple names, don't you? Get them right out there.
Absolutely.
And then
she's by Speightstown, and she's always acted, she's always been very precocious but very classy, and her mother was just the nicest horse to be around. So
is it good to train like bloodlines like that, where you had experience with either like the sire or the dam along the way in the bloodline?
I definitely think it can help, and I'm fortunate enough to train for a lot of breeders who I do tend to see some of their offspring. Ironically, with this filly, she doesn't belong to Sagamore, who raced shared account for Kevin Plank.
Right.
But it definitely helps, I think, to have the bloodlines.
And then you have Mississippi, who came off a nice win at Saratoga as well.
Yeah, so she's an interesting filly. She came to me late in the spring, and we kind of pointed her for a race at the end of Saratoga. We ended up running in the Glens Falls, which she won pretty nicely. Joel Rosario gave her a great ride. This is a filly that they thought very highly of in England last year as a 2-year-old, as a 3-year-old, I'm sorry. And then she kind of tailed off this year. So they thought that bringing her over here and a change of scenery might help her. And it seems to have done the job. And I'm pretty excited about it. We'll probably run her in the Flower Bowl at Belmont.
And then, obviously, all goes well, you might have 2 going on to Santa Anita later on.
I mean, like I say, at this time of year, you're looking for horses to point for these races. It's our Super Bowl, it's our end of the year championship. And so you just hope you can participate on that day.
I like to go back in time a little bit. Well, it doesn't seem like it was that long, but 2011 with Animal Kingdom, who won the Kentucky Derby. And then what a career. Going on 2 years later, won the Dubai World Cup. And to my knowledge, this is still the only Kentucky Derby winner to win a Grade 1 at age 5. I believe that's right.
Yeah, I mean, he was a special horse, Kenny. You were around me then, and you know how special he was to me. I mean, I never, getting in the business, I never necessarily expected to win the Kentucky Derby. I think it's almost too much of a goal to set for yourself, although everybody obviously wants to win it. And I think what he did after that, I mean, to just be beaten in the Breeders' Cup to Wise Dan when he finished second, and he was coming off a 6-month layoff that day, which is pretty unusual. I mean, it was amazing that Barry let me try that. And we almost pulled it off, and then he came back and, won the World Cup, which was an extraordinary night I'll never forget.
I thought that was really one of the more remarkable training jobs, to see the 3-year progress of Animal Kingdom. Like you mentioned, everybody had written him off, I think, but you guys. I mean, mostly, you come off 6 months and you're going to run the Breeders' Cup and you almost win it. And now we're going on to Dubai after that. That's really an amazing feat, Graham. I really, honestly, friendship aside, I think that's still one of the great training feats that I've seen.
Well, I think it's 2 things. It was, fortunately, Barry was crazy enough to allow me to do it. When I suggested to him that we could take a shot in the Breeders' Cup off a 6-month layoff, I think most people would have said, there's no way we can do that. But Barry went along with it quietly and let me do it. And then the other thing that was remarkable was the first year we went for the World Cup when he was injured. The first thing Barry said to me was, well, we'll take a shot next year. So, I mean, to have that kind of an attitude, I think that really helped. And besides that, the horse was just an amazing athlete.
Yeah, the things he did, first off, you're not supposed to win the Derby training him like you did. Remember all those questions when you came in? Because I was around the barn then. Obviously, I covered that 2011 Triple Crown run. Wait, he's been on synthetics. Is this a grass horse? Is he really ready to run the dirt race?
I mean, really, the first time we got him on the dirt properly was that Sunday before the Derby, and he
Yeah.
kind of put everything into one basket and said, "Look, if he works well on Sunday," and we tried to work him the weekends leading up to that, but it rained every weekend. So, finally, it was this Sunday, the Sunday before, or nothing at all, and he worked awesome. I'll never forget hearing Bob Baffert had watched the work, and he said, "That's the horse to beat," and that sort of, made me sit up at the time. I was a rookie, and it was an exciting week, that's for sure.
Talking with Graham Motion, of course, known for Animal Kingdom, most known for Animal Kingdom, as he should be, a World Cup winner, as well as obviously the Derby winner. Better Talk Now, Irish War Cry, I'm going to mention somebody, filmmaker, among your many outstanding horses. Winning your first race at 29 years old as a head trainer, I believe back in 93 at Laurel Park. That had to be some heady stuff for the kid from Cambridge, England, who came over and was assistant to the Hall of Famer Jonathan Shepherd for a few years.
Yeah, I started off, I always say Jonathan Shepherd was really my college. I worked for Jonathan for 5 years when I was out of high school. And then I went to work for Bernie Bond in Maryland, who was kind of a gruff older guy who really just trained 2-year-olds. He was iconic in Maryland for winning the 2-year-old races, which was such a good education for me. I came from working for Jonathan, who tended to have distance horses, to working for a 2-year-old trainer. And when Bernie retired, I took over the stable, and that's when I had my first winner, was with a horse that Bernie had trained called Bounding Daisy.
Wow, and look at this, and you've become a fixture in Maryland. I know you're out at Keeneland now, right? But home base is Fair Hill, Maryland.
Yeah, lucky to be at Fair Hill. It's a beautiful setup, and it's funny, Kenny, because when I first started training, it was almost unheard of for people to train stables that are now trained in training centers, if you like. I think Michael Dickinson was one of the first ones to really make it kind of appealing to train horses off the track, whereas now it's almost become fashionable to train in training centers instead of the track.
Graham, what have you noticed in the training, like you mentioned with the Animal Kingdom, really getting the first really work on dirt just a week out from winning the Kentucky Derby? And we've seen now for over a decade trainers that are giving 6 weeks before the Derby to bring a horse in and run him again, which was unheard of, and not having a heavy campaign to get ready for the Derby. It seems like it's just a ongoing change of training methods and measures across the board for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's true. And look, I think as a trainer, I always studied. It always fascinated me how people got through the Triple Crown, because I think it's the trickiest thing to know how to handle your horse when you're running back in 2 weeks in the Preakness and then 3 weeks in the Belmont. It's something we never do at any other time of year. So it always intrigued me to see how trainers do it. And I think you're right. I think it's evolved so much, and it's almost become fashionable to bring your horses up to the Derby fairly lightly race, whereas I think in years gone by, it was the opposite.
Yeah, if you didn't have a horse, they say, what's wrong? He's only had 2 races. Has he been sick or injured? Now it's kind of commonplace, 2 or 3 races. That's a full campaign coming into the Derby.
Yes, no doubt. And when I had been to the Derby before Animal Kingdom, but I'd never come with the caliber of horse I had that day. And I think the events of getting him to the Derby were extraordinary. He was lucky to get into the prep race at Turfway. I think he just got in. He was one of the last ones to get into that race. And had he not, he probably never would have made it. So it's funny how how events like that can guide the future in horse racing.
You made a lot of people happy that day, including, you mentioned owner Barry Irwin earlier. People were finding out. They found out a lot about you. It is, I don't want to say a career maker. You were already established and respected, but that's a famous race. I'll set that. You win a famous race, and certainly the Derby, I think, especially in the U.S., there's none more famous. Everybody knows the winner of the Derby now.
Yeah, when you wake up on Sunday morning after winning the Derby, you kind of have to pinch yourself, that's for sure.
I remember, let's see, before the Belmont, coming off his second in the Preakness, before the Belmont, I believe you went to your son's 8th grade graduation, or was that Jane, your daughter's 8th grade graduation?
That would have been my daughter's, that's right.
Been Jane's, yeah. Which we all found fascinating at NBC, how calm and collected you were. your first big run through the Triple Crown, and you still had priorities. You had time to take off a day and go see your family and see your daughter graduate 8th grade.
It was definitely tough for those 2 weeks to sort of get your head around anything else other than the Derby winner. But you got to make time, and I'm fortunate that my wife keeps me straight. And I will tell you this: there's nothing comparable in my mind as to going to Pimlico with the Derby winner for the Preakness. I mean, that was just the most extraordinary feeling, walking over, being the only horse that can win the Triple Crown. And really, most people are rooting for you to win, let's face it. That's a pretty special feeling.
And home track, more or less for you, home area, certainly Maryland, Laurel, Pimlico area. I mean, to be coming, kind of like a homecoming in some ways, I guess, for the guy from Cambridge, England, who's made his mark in Maryland racing.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, Pimlico was where I first met Bernie Bond, which was really what got my career started. And it was pretty humbling. And I really regret that he got beaten that day. I think he was really unlucky. He got off a step slow, and he just had to chase Shackelford the whole way. And I always felt that the middle of the track was much deeper than the inside of the track. They only raced there for 2 weeks, and I felt like they'd added a lot of dirt, and it definitely had a different color to it on the outside. And when he came running, down the middle of the track after just not breaking super sharp, it was just too much to ask for him to get to Shackelford. He couldn't quite get there, which was, to me, that was always a big disappointment because I thought he was very much within himself to win that race. And
you and Dale Roman's kind of maybe an unexpected friendship, friendly rivalry thing emerged. I remember sitting on a bench the day before and doing an interview with you, and of course with Animal Kingdom, and Dale with Shackelford. Do you remember taping that deal that we did? I guess it was the morning of the Belmont over there in the paddock looking at the Secretariat statue.
I think that's right. I mean, I had a sort of out-of-body experience with Dale when right after I won the Derby. I wasn't that familiar with Churchill Downs, and of course for Dale, it's his home turf. So I was in a little bit of a fog, if you like, and trying to figure out how to get to the winner's circle. And I saw Dale, who's, as you know, he's a large presence.
Yes.
And he's like, I'm going to get you to the winner's circle. Follow me. So I kind of literally grabbed onto his coattails, and that's how I got down to the winner's circle. So
it is confusing, isn't it, after the Derby? If you won the Derby, everybody asks me, they think that you guys just come right up to me and everybody lines up and here's a nice, easy path and we all grab our interviews and things. But it's really kind of a controlled chaos in a fun sort of way, at least, trying to find out what's going on and where the winners are. And, I was looking for you and looking for Barry. Everybody's looking to see what's going on. And it has to be, I guess, I don't think it's frustrating as much as exciting for you because, they're not going to give the trophy out till you get there.
That's right. Well, let's face it, you don't go up to sit in the grandstand before the race thinking, I wonder how I'm going to get to the winner's circle for the Kentucky Derby. So we really didn't have a plan. And it is a big facility and there are a lot of people there. So by the time you get through, seeing everybody who wants to congratulate you and just the general throng. And I remember when I got down to the bottom of the stairs in the grandstand, I saw Chip Woolley, who'd won it maybe a couple of years before.
Yeah.
Things like that just really stick in your mind.
Was there a moment in that race that you thought Animal Kingdom's going to win this now? I'm going to win the Kentucky Derby. Was there a moment other than the obvious right at the very ending of it?
I tell you honestly, Kenny, I had run horses in the Derby before, and I always felt at the 3/8 pole, you kind of knew how you were standing. And usually my horses were running out of gas when they got to the 3 furlong pole, which is 3 furlongs from home.
Right.
So when I noticed at the 3/8 pole that Johnny had a ton of horse, and I'm kind of thinking, it looks like he's got a lot of horse and he's trying to figure out where to go. I must say, I was suddenly like, wow, we're in the game here. We got a good shot.
And that was a special moment. I enjoy the fact that you've always enjoyed your family and your wife and son and daughter, and everybody's been a part of your success all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, it was special to have them there for it. I mean, doesn't always work out that way. And my son missed school on Monday morning, and I remember he was probably in middle school, and his teacher said that was the greatest excuse he'd ever had for a kid missing school was because his dad won the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, that should get you out of school for a few days, shouldn't it?
That's right.
And I remember the whole thing with Johnny Velasquez coming aboard.
It was very odd. I mean, I could talk about it all day, but I met Todd going to the draw for the Kentucky Derby, Todd Pletcher, in the parking lot before the draw. And he said, I might have a problem with my horse. I'm not 100% sure we're going to be okay. I think he'd had a few issues that week. I can't exactly remember. And my jockey, Robbie Alvarado, had been hurt a couple of days before. So there were a lot of moving parts. It was extraordinary. I went to Johnny myself. I knew where he was staying. I think it must have been on the Thursday or the Friday before the Derby. And basically we'd made a decision that if Robbie wasn't able to ride on Oaks Day, then he probably shouldn't ride our horse in the Derby, which I think, honestly, for Barry and the partners, it was a fair decision.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Robbie would disagree because he tried so hard to get back to ride on Saturday, but he'd had a pretty nasty injury.
Right.
Johnny became available. I spoke with Johnny in the hallway of his hotel and said, look, I think you can ride this horse if that's what you want to do, if Todd's not running, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it's kind of like the perfect storm, wasn't it? Everything came together when it could have fallen apart when you lost Alvarado as your jockey.
Yes, and I mean, as badly as I feel for Robbie, who'd worked the horse, Johnny was a pretty close friend of ours. Our kids grew up together, so you hate to get too soppy and too sentimental in the racing game because it can be a pretty cruel game. But it was extra special having Johnny on the horse. There's no doubt about it.
Among the many things I like about Graham Motion, a good family man, an outstanding trainer, and a guy who has an opinion. I read your tweets. You have a lot of opinions, and one especially now is what has gone on with the story that came out last week in the New York Times about scopolamine being found in the system of Justify around the Santa Anita Derby time. We had talked earlier with Dr. Mary Scalay, who I know you know, who made some interesting comments about, like, scopolamine is not even tested prior to the Derby. Afterwards, yes, but not prior to, because most don't consider it performance enhancing. And even like the International Doping Association that controls the Olympics, again, they're pretty strict there. They think scopolamine is acceptable. They don't accept everything. They'll accept that. So that seems a lot. And I guess, Graham, the whole question I have for you is, with when you get into nanograms and talking about general public confusion that a lot of people have had over Justify, do you think that this is at least going to maybe try to trigger some talk that people are going to try to sit down in horse racing and have some uniformity and better communications so you don't have another story like this coming out?
100%, Kenny. I mean, I hope something good comes of this. And to those that don't know, first of all, you have to realize that we're talking about nanograms, and a nanogram is a billionth of a gram. I mean, that is an extraordinarily small measurement. Clearly, they've had an issue with this contamination in California before. It's something that's found in the hay and the bedding, particularly in California. And I think it's probably a good thing. Well, I know it's a good thing that the California Racing Commission made the decision that this should not be a positive for Justify. This is something they had several cases. My understanding is they had several cases that weekend of the Santa Anita Derby, which has happened before in California. Mm-hmm. And they made the decision that this was a contaminant. Now, the problem is that the RMTC, of which Mary Scalay is now the head, are pretty adamant that contamination does not exist in other forms. They allow for, I could be speaking wrong, but I'm a little vague to it, but I'm fairly sure this is right. They allow certain amounts of contaminants with some medications, but not with others. Mm-hmm. And that's where I have a problem. And the fact that each state has different guidelines for medication, this is a big problem for our industry. And I think because of this, we constantly give ourselves a black eye in our sport. Our testing is actually very rigorous in horse racing. Yeah. But we're dealing with animals, we're dealing with livestock, and we're shipping into, for example, when we go to Keeneland in 2 weeks, we're right on the heels of these stalls where we house the horses, having yearlings that are being prepared for the stales, mm-hmm. where, if a horse has a temperature, they're going to get treated with medication. So it's very easy for a contaminant to be left in a stall that the yearling was treated with, when you're measuring that smaller amounts, a billionth of a gram, we're talking. In my opinion, it's very easy to have contamination. And I think the trainers deserve to be protected better than we are going forward, because that's what will prevent things like this happening in the future.
And, to me, the timing of it all, too, I'm not here to defend it. Bob Baffert, what a class act he is. He doesn't need my, defending him. I mean, his record speaks for himself. And the way the horse ran, I told someone in an interview last week, I didn't see an uproar among the fellow trainers or owners that were going against Justify. That's how good the horse was. And I guess the whole point of this is, Graham, do you think sometimes, and again, I'm talking more of those on the outside looking in or very casual fans, it's not like it's just full of performance-enhancing drugs and they're at the ready and everybody's using this stuff?
Look, I think 99% of the trainers do not want to cheat. You're always going to have somebody in any sport.
Sure.
You're always going to have people that are going to try and take an edge in any sport. But most trainers out there want to play by the rules. The trouble is that the rules are constantly changing. The guidelines are constantly changing. And we're dealing with livestock. And it makes it very easy to have mistakes. And, in this country, every state has different regulations. So every time, I'm stable at Fair Hill. Every time I run a horse, I have to ship somewhere, whether it's Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, or New York, or even across to California. And I'm having to follow different rules all the time. And, it's unrealistic to say that you can't medicate horses, because horses get sick. Horses get wounds. Horses need to be treated just like humans. So it's only fair to us that we have better guidelines to follow. And that's what I take issue with in this. And I honestly believe that the Racing Commission in California probably did the right thing. What they should have done, though, was been open about it rather than keeping it under the table. That's what creates a problem.
Yeah, the timing of it was really suspect now. I mean, to me, before last year's Belmont, after last year's Belmont. But again, it's sensational. It brings attention in a negative light, I think, to the sport overall. I just hope maybe, as you have eloquently put, that somebody steps back in the industry and says maybe we can get like New York, California, Kentucky, Maryland, the major Florida, major racing states come together and just have almost, if you will, like a Supreme Court, have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people things go through to say, this is nanograms and things are too confusing. Let's have a universal thing that if Graham's shipping his horses from Maryland to wherever, or Baffert's coming from California to wherever, everybody's on the same page. And it just seems too simple, doesn't it?
We need to do better, though, Kenny, because we're constantly opening ourselves up to criticism. You can blame Joe Drape for the article in the New York Times, but at the end of the day, we can only blame ourselves for putting ourselves in this position. We need to run our industry better. We're running for millions of dollars. The horses are worth millions of dollars. So we need to be doing better. We need to do a better job of protecting our game.
I think so. If you ever run for a commissioner or something, I'll vote for you. I don't know.
I probably wouldn't be very good at it. I probably have way too many opinions, but it does frustrate me. It hurts me in this game. It makes it almost spoils the constant concern about running out of state.
Yeah.
It's always a worry to me, and another issue I have is the testing is so stringent. We're testing for such minute levels that the testing barns where our samples are held should be like labs almost. And a lot of tracks, they're not. And I think we as trainers deserve that. I think our samples, when they're taken from the horses, should be kept in a much better condition than they are.
Well, and one thing I would like to see is just what you're doing now, speaking out. Not a lot of trainers or owners want to speak out, and I guess no one wants to hurt anybody's feelings or come in where there's hard feelings when you ship somewhere. But I do think that there needs to be it the Breeders' Cup or NTRA or someone in authority to take a little stronger stance of things that you're saying and say we got to look at our sport and not be apologetic all the time and be on the defensive all the time.
Well, that's the truth. And I tell you, trainers on the whole won't speak out. And I was probably the same until I had my own situation with a positive I had several years ago, which I am I feel very strongly was caused by contamination, because there's no other way it could have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And until you're put in that position yourself, you tend not to want to speak out. But once you've been put in that position and everybody disappears from around you to protect you, you feel much stronger about it, I think, when you found yourself in that position.
Well, and again, like you say, it to me, it makes sense. It's, I think, too simple is probably why they won't do it. But especially after this and after this negative publicity, for some of the commissioners from the different states to get together and just say we should seek uniformity, it just seems, and take in a lot of things you just said about, these nanograms, where you're talking a billionth of a gram, it does just seem kind of asinine to me. And I know it does to people that barely know the sport. It confuses them, because most of my friends are not horse racing guys. They're other sports guys, and they've asked me to try to explain all this for the last week.
But Kenny, if nothing else, if we can't come up with a governing body because of the state rules, I understand that because of the gambling.
Right.
But if nothing else, why can't we have some kind of an oversight commission that, say, the stewards can call on a Saturday in New York when they've got a questionable call, like in the NFL? Why can't they have a direct line to a group of stewards who oversee everybody and who can give them advice on how to handle a bad call? Why can't we take a positive test to an overseeing group who advise them on how to handle it? Why can't we have a media group that can answer to these problems we've had, these tragedies we've had in California, the positive of Justify we're finding out about? We need someone to get out in front of this and help us to deal with it. Every other sport in this country has somebody that helps them with that, and we don't, and that's a terrible shame.
Well put, Graham, as always. That's why I knew you'd be perfect for this show today.
Well, thank you, Kenny. Hopefully we can do better. It's a great sport. I'm incredibly lucky to be part of it, and that's why I feel so strongly about it.
Well, best wishes sharing in Mississippi on the way to the Breeders' Cup, we hope, for you.
Fingers crossed. I'll see you there, Kenny.
And great catching up and reminiscing, too, about Animal Kingdom. Always a pleasure, Graham Motion. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Great insight about a lot of things, as I knew he would. Stay with us. More of the Horse Racing Show right after this.